In 1875, a former student of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia decided to paint his former professor. This painting by Thomas Eakins is titled The Grossclinic, as it was named after Samuel David Gross, the prominently depicted man. It's one of the best-known scientific paintings in the United States, as it accurately depicts a scene when surgery was still in its infancy. It took $68 million to keep the painting in Philadelphia in the early 21st century, and that's a fascinating story in itself. Remarkably, the painting was first exhibited in an obscure corner of a popular event in Philadelphia in the year 1876. In this video, you'll learn everything about the grossclinic, its follow-up painting, and the man who painted them. Let's first take a closer look at Thomas Eakins, the painter of this mesmerizing work of art. Eakins was born on July 25, 1844, and lived and worked the most part of his life in his native Philadelphia. His father, Benjamin Eakins, was a master of calligraphy, and it's likely from him that the young Thomas inherited his talent in drawing. He continued to develop his passion for arts in his adolescent years. This eventually led him to enroll at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in Philadelphia in 1861. It's during these first years in the 1860s that he developed a fascination for the human body. During his time at the Academy of Fine Arts, he took up additional classes in anatomy and dissection. He studied these subjects between 1864 and 1865 at Jefferson Medical College. This was the university where Dr. Samuel Gross taught, and it's also the setting of the Gross Clinic. Before I dive deeper into the painting's story, I want to share another interesting anecdote about Thomas Eakins. Eakins was in his 20s when he studied human anatomy and briefly considered becoming a surgeon. His thoughts of becoming a professional painter, however, prevailed, and in 1866 he made a bold decision. He abruptly ended his studies at Jefferson Medical College and decided to travel to Europe to study art. What better place to go than the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, right? Apart from his academic studies, he also got first-hand experience in the studios of two renowned French painters. One of these was Jean-Léon Gérôme, the leading academic painter at the time, best known for his classical and oriental subjects. Gérôme taught about 2,000 students between 1864 and 1904, and Eakins was only the second American student he ever had. Although it inspired Eakins to adopt a realism style, he was even more inspired by his other mentor, Léon Bonnat. Although less famous, Bonnat was especially known for his anatomically accurate depictions of the human body. Perhaps the most important note about his stay in Paris is that he became a master portraitist. In 1869, he wrote a letter to his father stating that he could paint heads so magnificently that he could earn a living anywhere in America doing just that. I think it's clear that his confidence got a serious boost during this period, and he decided at that moment that he would become a professional painter. Just look at how he depicted Dr. Samuel Gross, staring in deep contemplation while performing surgery. He completed over 250 portraits during his career, and he put a high emphasis on realism. Regardless, his portraits are distinctive, and he always attempted to reveal the character of the people he painted. Other subjects he loved to paint included wrestling and boxing matches. That's mainly because this allowed him to highlight his love for the human body, which was mainly directed at the male figure. Nevertheless, his sexual preference remains a topic of debate until today. He got female lovers and he was married during the final decades of his life. Thomas Eakins had a passion for photography, and this further fueled the realism in his works. Finally, apart from his legacy as a painter, he also taught hundreds of aspiring artists during his career. It's fair to conclude that he was one of the most influential American painters in history. This brings us to the Gross Clinic, which is now easily considered to be one of his ultimate masterpieces. It's a fairly large work of art that has dimensions of 2.4 by 2 meters, or about 8 by 6.5 feet. In the foreground, you can see several surgeons who are treating a person for what was presumably an infection of the thigh bone. It's impossible to see whether or not this is a male or a female patient, but the general consensus is that it was a young boy. In the background, you see a bunch of people who witnessed the surgery in a theater, including Thomas Eakins himself. He's the young man near the railing of the theater, who is eagerly taking sketches of the scene. As you surely expected, Thomas Eakins based this painting on a surgery he witnessed himself when he was a student at Jefferson Medical College. Dr. Samuel Gross was Eakins' teacher during the 1860s, so he would surely have known how things worked back then. The surgery is anything like how surgeries today are performed, especially in terms of cleanliness. There is little emphasis on hygiene as multiple people are working on the sedated patient. That's because this event took place at a time when surgery was still an experimental procedure. The only known procedure just before this type of surgery was performed was an amputation. Just over a decade later, in 1889, Eakins painted a follow-up painting to the grossclinic, called the agnewclinic. In it, you can see the then-retired Dr. David Hayes Agnew in a similar surgical theater at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. This painting is significantly brighter, and as you can see, the surgeons wear white coats. A nurse oversees the procedure, and the improvements in terms of cleanliness are evident. What's fascinating about this painting is that every single person depicted has been identified, except for the patient. Back to the grossclinic now, as there's another thing that strikes you when you check out this powerful work of art. The calm demeanor of Dr. Gross is in sheer contrast to the emotional reaction of the woman right next to him. His hands are bloody as he holds his scalpel and he looks quite determined. His stare, however, doesn't exactly breed confidence that the procedure was successful. The woman is brought to tears, and although we don't know who she was, it's likely that she was the patient's mother. Today, the grossclinic is considered to be an absolute masterclass of American realism. At the time, however, the graphic depiction of an ongoing surgery was deemed shocking. Thomas Eakins submitted it for the Centennial Exposition in 1876, but it was remarkably rejected for this prestigious event. The other painting he submitted, titled The Chess Players, was significantly smaller and was accepted by the event's jury. Although it didn't hang in the art gallery, Eakins' grossclinic was still exhibited. It was featured in a rather gloomy corner of the US Army Post Hospital of the exposition. Thomas Eakins had high hopes to impress the approximately 10 million people who visited the exposition in his home city. He was left quite disappointed with the outcome, to put it euphemistically. The $200 he earned from it when it was purchased by Jefferson Medical College didn't improve the sentiment. It hung in the college building for about a century before it was moved to Jefferson Alumni Hall in the 1980s. It seemed as if the painting would hang inside the building indefinitely, but then, in 2006, an offer of $68 million was made. This joint deal between the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the National Gallery of Art was almost completed. Miraculously, a fund was established to prevent this sale, and within a few months, $30 million was raised to keep the painting in Philadelphia. To make up for the difference, because the fund was still $38 million short, several other paintings by Eakins had to be sold. These included his singing cowboy, the cello player, and his renowned Cowboys in the Badlands. An additional bank loan assured that the painting remains co-owned by two of Philadelphia's most famous museums. Today, you can admire Eakins' masterpiece at either the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts or the magnificent Philadelphia Museum of Art.